Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of Loss, Love, and All the Other Shit in Between. Now, this episode is called The Upside Down, Living in Multiple Realities. Now, there is a version of you that the world recognizes immediately. That version shows up on time. It replies to messages. It handles responsibility. It knows how to be appropriate, functional, and steady, even on days when something inside feels anything but. This is the version that people describe when they talk about you: reliable, strong, capable, grounded. And then there is another version of you, quieter, less visible, rarely given the floor. The one that carries fatigue that sleep doesn't fix. The one that revisits old conversations while brushing teeth or driving home. The one that feels the weight of things you never quite found language for. Most people don't live one reality, they live both. This is where the upside down begins. Not in fantasy, not in disassociation, but in the very real split between who you've learned to be present and who you actually carry. We don't divide ourselves because we're dishonest. We divide ourselves because at some point it became necessary. Early on, you learn what's welcome. You notice which emotions get comforted and which get brushed past. You learn that enthusiasm is acceptable, but sadness needs to be brief. That anger is inconvenient. That vulnerability has limits. So you adjust. Not consciously at first. It's subtle. You soften certain edges. You tighten others. You learn how to read a room before you read yourself. And slowly, without realizing it, a public self takes shape. A version of you designed to move through the world with minimal friction. This self isn't fake, it's skilled. It knows how to keep things flowing. It knows how to be useful. And it knows how to hold it together. But for many people, this is praised. You become the strong one, the one who copes, the one who doesn't fall apart. And on the surface, it looks like resilience. But underneath it, something else is happening. Because when performance becomes protection, rest disappears. Being capable turns into a role you can step out of. Being calm becomes something you must maintain, not something you feel. Being fine becomes a reflex, even when it isn't true. The public self does its job well. So well, in fact, that no one questions whether there's more going on beneath it. And eventually, neither do you. This is the loneliness of being partially seen, not abandoned, not rejected, but only known in fragments. You can be surrounded by people who care about you and still feel profoundly alone, because this part of you that needs company never leaves the house. It stays behind the scenes, watching you perform your own life. That's the private self. The private self is where the real processing happens. This is where you replay moments you never fully resolved, where you carry grief that didn't quite get enough space, where doubts surface late at night when no one's asking how you are. It's where emotional labor lives. And because it's quiet, it often gets unnoticed, even by you. You tell yourself you're doing well because technically you are. Life is functioning, responsibilities are being met, but functioning isn't the same as being integrated. The upside down exists when your inner world is rich, complex, emotional, and your outer world only interacts with the controlled summary of it. Over time, this creates tension because the private self doesn't disappear just because it isn't acknowledged. It waits. It shows up as exhaustion without a clear cause, an irritability that feels out of character, as a sense that something is missing even when life looks full. And often the hardest part isn't the pain itself, it's the self-judgment layered on top of it. I shouldn't still feel like this. I've handled worse. Other people have it harder. So you minimize yourself. Again. But living in two realities doesn't mean you're broken. It means you adapted to environments that didn't have room for all of you. It means you learn to prioritize stability over expression, belonging over honesty, survival over softness. The problem isn't that you developed a public self. The problem is when you start abandoning the private one to keep the public one intact. Integration doesn't mean oversharing. It doesn't mean collapsing your boundaries or exposing everything to everyone. It means including yourself in your own life. Letting the private self exist without treating it like an inconvenience. Listening without immediately trying to fix or silence it. Allowing complexity without rushing towards resolution. The upside down begins when you stop asking, why am I like this? And start asking, what did I learn that made this necessary? There is nothing wrong with you for having layers. You didn't imagine them. You earned them. And the work ahead isn't about learning to tear the public self down. It's about no longer disappearing behind it. One of the most confusing experiences a person can have is knowing they're safe and still not feeling safe. On paper, your life hasn't changed. The danger is gone. The situation is over. The chapter is closed, but something inside you didn't get the memo. That's where the upside down stops being about identity and starts being about time, because not all parts of you live in the same moment. One part of you is here in the present, paying bills, having conversations, making plans. Another part of you is still operating in the past, not consciously, not deliberately, but reflexively. This isn't imagination. It isn't weakness. And it isn't you holding on to things. It's what happens when experience is stored in the body instead of the story. Real time moves forward. Trauma time doesn't. Trauma time loops. It reacts to tone before content, to familiarity before logic, to sensation before thought. That's why a raised voice can feel threatening even when no harm is coming. Why a look can trigger a response that feels disproportionate. Why you can't be calm one moment and flooded the next without understanding why. From the outside, it can look confusing. From the inside, it can feel embarrassing. You ask yourself why you reacted the way you did, why you froze, why you shut down, why your body betrayed what your mind knew to be true. But your body isn't betraying you, it's protecting you, using outdated information. Trauma time is the nervous system doing its job too well for too long. It learned patterns once when it needed to, and now it's reluctant to let them go. That's why logic alone doesn't heal trauma. You can explain something to yourself 1,000 times and still feel the same response in your chest, in your stomach, and in your breath. Because trauma isn't stored as a thought, it's stored as a state, a readiness, a tension, a constant low-level alertness. So when people say things like, that was years ago, you're not there anymore. Why does this still affect you? What they're really misunderstanding is how memory works. Your brain might know it's over. Your nervous system might still be scanning for danger. That gap between knowing and feeling is one of the most powerful, painful layers of the upside down. It's where self-doubt creeps in. You start questioning your own reactions. You start minimizing your experience. You tell yourself you're dramatic, sensitive, or stuck, and shame moves in. Now, shame doesn't heal trauma, it cements it. Because now you're not only carrying the original experience, you're carrying judgment about how you responded to it. This is where many people get stuck, not because they aren't trying to heal, but because they're trying to heal by arguing with their nervous system. They push themselves to move on, they override signals, they force calm, and sometimes that works for a while. But suppression isn't integration, and eventually the body insists on being heard. The upside down of trauma time is that you can be doing everything right and still feel like something is wrong. You can be successful, loved, stable, and still feel like you're bracing for impact. That doesn't mean that healing hasn't failed. It means healing hasn't finished communicating yet. Your goal isn't to erase trauma time. You don't delete it. You don't overpower it. You don't shame it into silence. You update it. You help the nervous system learn that now is different, and that happens slowly. through repetition, not force, through safety, not pressure, through compassion, not correction. Sometimes it looks like pausing instead of pushing. Sometimes it looks like naming what you feel about explaining it away. Sometimes it looks like allowing a reaction without turning into a story about who you are. Integration happens when the present keeps showing up calmly and enough for the past to loosen its grip. This is why healing doesn't look dramatic most of the time. It looks boring, subtle, uneventful. It looks like fewer spikes, shorter recoveries, more space between trigger and response. It looks like recognizing when you're reacting from memory instead of reality and choosing not to punish yourself for it. The upside down softens when you stop demanding that all parts of you operate on the same timeline. Some parts of you learn things early and hard. They don't trust quickly. They don't relax easily. That doesn't make them enemies. It makes them experienced. You don't heal by leaving those parts behind. You heal by letting them catch up, by showing them over and over again that the present is stable enough to stand in. And maybe the most important thing to understand is this: feeling something from the past doesn't mean you're back there. It means something old is asking for attention in a new moment. You are now regressing. You are integrating. The upside down isn't a sign that time is broken inside you. It's a sign that time is layered. And learning to live with those layers without turning against yourself is one of the most powerful forms of healing there is. Love is one of the first places where the upside down becomes visible, because love doesn't activate desire, it activates memory. It brings closeness into contact with history. It puts intimacy next to experience. And suddenly you're not just responding to the person in front of you, you're responding to everything that taught you what love can cost. That's why loving after hurt feels different. Not colder, not broken, different. There's a part of you that wants closeness, deeply, connection, ease, being met without explanation. And there's another part of you that stays alert, watching tone, tracking shifts, reading between the lines. You can want intimacy and still feel your body tense when it arrives. That's the upside down of love. Desire and defense existing at the same time. This isn't emotional unavailability, it's experience speaking. Before, love might have felt expansive and consuming. Now it feels deliberate, measured, aware. You don't fall in the same way anymore. You enter, and that shift can feel confusing, especially when you compare yourself to who you used to be. You might miss the intensity, the innocence, the way love once felt limitless. But what you're really missing isn't love itself. You're missing not knowing what you know now. Because love doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens inside a nervous system shaped by attachment, loss, disappointment, and repair. So when someone gets close, two realities show up. One that wants to lean in, one that remembers what happens when you lean too far. That doesn't mean you're doing love wrong. It means you're loving with memory. The upside down here is that awareness can feel like fear if you don't understand it. You might question yourself. Why can't I just relax? Why do I overthink this? What does something make me so anxious? But awareness isn't anxiety. Awareness is pattern recognition. It's your system saying, I've been here before. I'm paying attention now. Now, the challenge isn't to silence that voice. The challenge is to discern it, to ask whether it's warning you of real danger or reminding you of old pain that haven't been fully resolved. This is where many people get stuck. They confuse caution with damage. They confuse boundaries with walls. You confuse nervousness with incompatibility. And sometimes they abandon connection too early, not because it's wrong, because it feels unfamiliar to stay. Because healthy love can feel unsettling when chaos once felt normal. Calm can feel suspicious. Consistency can feel boring. Safety can feel undeserved. That's another layer of the upside down. You're not craving dysfunction. You're adjusting to regulation. Secure love doesn't spike your nervous system the way unstable love does. It doesn't keep you guessing. It doesn't demand performance. It doesn't require self-erasure. And if you've never experienced that before, it can feel flat at first until your system realizes it doesn't need to brace. Loving in two worlds means holding this tension without panicking, letting connection grow without rushing it, letting trust build without forcing certainty, letting yourself be seen without handing over your entire nervous system. This is especially true later in life, when you've already loved, already lost, already rebuilt yourself at least once. You're not expecting or entering into love empty-handed anymore. You bring discernment, boundaries, self-knowledge. That doesn't make you harder to love. It makes you harder to lose yourself in it. And that's not a flaw. That's growth. The upside down also shows up in how you show affection. You might be deeply loyal but slower to open, warm but selective, committed but no longer reckless with your heart. And if someone mistakes that for distance, the old part of you might feel the urge to over-explain, to prove you care, to perform closeness, to shrink your boundaries so you don't seem difficult. And here's the truth. You don't need to bleed to prove you're open. You don't need to abandon self-protection to show love. Healthy love doesn't ask you to choose between intimacy and safety. It integrates them. The upside down softens when you stop judging yourself for loving differently than you're used to. When you stop romanticizing the versions of love that required you to disappear. When you recognize that pacing isn't avoidance, it's respect for your own nervous system. Love in two worlds isn't about choosing fear or connection. It's about allowing both to exist while you decide consciously how you want to move. It's saying, I feel cautious and I'm still here. I feel vulnerable and I'm not abandoning myself. I feel connected and I'm allowed to take my time. That's not guardedness. That's integration. And maybe the most important reframe of all of this is the fact that love feels different now doesn't mean it's weaker. It means it's informed. It means it's not running ahead of reality. It means it's rooted in presence, not fantasy. The upside down in love isn't something to overcome. It's something to navigate with honesty, because loving after hurt isn't about returning to who you were before. It's about becoming someone who can stay without losing themselves. Parenthood is one of the most clearest places where multiple realities exist at the same time, because the moment you become responsible for another life, you begin living in constant duality. There is the world you are building for your child, and the world you are still carrying inside yourself. You don't get to choose one. You live in both. On the surface, you are the steady one, the organizer, the provider, the emotional anchor. You show up even when you're tired. You regulate when you don't feel regulated. You stay calm when something in you wants to break. This is the visible reality of parenthood. But underneath it, there is another one. Quieter, heavier, rarely spoken about. The reality where you're still processing your own past, still unpacking in what you didn't receive, still noticing the moments where your child needs touch, and then old wounds you thought were settled. This is the upside down of parenting. Not failure, not inadequacy, but parallel emotional labor. You're raising a child while reparenting parts of yourself. And that works doesn't pause just because the school run needs doing. Many parents carry a silent pressure to be healed before they parent. And if emotional work should be finished first, and if you should be fully resolved before guiding someone else. But healing doesn't work like that. You don't arrive at parenthood complete. You arrive human, with history, with patterns, with things you're still learning to name. The upside down here is that you are both teacher and student at the same time. You're teaching emotional safety while learning it yourself. You're modeling regulation while still practicing it. You're breaking cycles while still feeling the weight of them. Now that can feel exhausting and deeply lonely because few people talk honestly about it. Instead, there's a quiet expectation to cope, to be grateful, to manage, to push through. But the truth is, parenting activates everything. It brings attachment to the surface. It exposes your triggers. It mirrors your own childhood back to you in unexpected moments. Sometimes through tenderness, sometimes through frustration, sometimes through grief you didn't know was still there. And when that happens, shame often follows. You judge yourself for reacting. You worry you're doing damage. You fear repeating what hurt you. But awareness isn't harm. Awareness is the beginning of choice. The upside down isn't that old patterns appear. It's about now have the consciousness to respond differently. Breaking cycles doesn't mean never making mistakes. It means repairing them. It means noticing when you're overwhelmed and naming it. It means apologizing when you misstep. And it means showing your child that emotions don't need to be hidden to be handled. Children don't need perfect parents. They need present ones. They need to see that feelings can exist without destroying connection. That tension can be repaired. That safety isn't the absence of emotion, it's the ability to move through it together. And here's where the upside down becomes something powerful. Because while you're guiding your child, something else is happening quietly. You're giving yourself what you didn't have. Not in grand gestures, but in moments, in patience, where there once was dismissal, in explanation, where there once was silence, in consistency, where there once wasn't chaos, there was chaos. Every time you choose to respond instead of react, you're not just parenting your child, you're healing a layer of yourself. Now, that doesn't make the world lighter, but it makes it meaningful. Parenthood also forces a reckoning with strength. You can't afford to collapse completely, but you can't numb yourself either. You learn how to hold vulnerability and responsibility at the same time. That's a reality few people acknowledge. The upside down here is being strong and sensitive simultaneously, being dependable while still feeling deeply, being a safe place while still needing one yourself. And many parents carry this without support. They're praised for coping, rarely asked how they're coping, especially when they're the reliable one, the calm one, the one who handles things. But emotional labor doesn't disappear just because it's invisible. It accumulates. It shows up as fatigue that rest doesn't touch, and irritability that feels out of character, as guilt for wanting space in a role that's meant to be fulfilling. And again, shame creeps in. Other parents manage. I should be more grateful. I chose this. But choosing something meaningful doesn't make it easy. And loving your child doesn't cancel out the complexity of raising them while still healing yourself. The upside down of parenthood isn't something to escape. It's something to normalize. Because living in two realities doesn't mean you're falling or even failing as a parent. It means you're honest about what this role requires. It requires presence, consistency, and a willingness to keep growing. Not perfection, not emotional erasure, not pretending you don't exist outside this role. One of the most powerful things a parent can do is to allow your child to see them as human. And to see them as human, appropriately, safely, but truthfully. To show that emotions can be named, that mistakes can be repaired, that strength includes reflection. That doesn't burden a child, it teaches resilience. The upside down softens when you stop demanding that parenthood resolve everything inside you. It isn't meant to. It's meant to reveal, to bring forward what still needs attention, to give you new opportunities to choose differently. You don't have to be healed to be a good parent. You just have to be willing to stay conscious, to stay accountable, to stay present. And perhaps the most important truth of all, your child doesn't need you to be flawless. They need you to be real, to show them that life can be held with care, even when it's complicated. That's not weakness, that's leadership. And it's one of the most demanding, unseen forms of strength there is. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being seen as strong, not admired, not celebrated, but relied on. It's the loneliness of being the one people count on, while no one really checks in on you. For a lot of people, especially men, strength was never taught as something flexible. It was taught as control, as keeping it together, as not letting things show. You learn early that staying calm matters more than being honest, that coping gets praised more than feeling, that being useful makes you valuable. So you learn to keep them things inside. You push through tiredness, you ignore discomfort, you turn emotion into action, and it works. You become dependable, you become steady, you become the one who handles it. But there's a cost to that. Because the more solid you appear, the less likely people are to ask how you're actually doing. They assume you're the fine one because you always are. That's the upside down of strength. Because emotionally deep in a world that rewards emotional silence, most people don't realize how much they're carrying until something finally shows them. A relationship that asks for openness, a child who needs emotional presence, a loss that breaks through the routine. And when that happens, it can feel overwhelming, not because the feelings are new, but because you never taught what to do with them. You weren't shown how to feel without losing control. You weren't given language for emotion. You were taught that it was safe to speak before things got bad. So instead, you learned to keep going. You stayed functional. You stayed composed. You stayed quiet. And you told yourself that meant you were to be strong. But real strength isn't about having no feelings. It's about being able to sit with them. The upside down here is that emotional depth often develops in silence. People who feel a lot don't always talk much. People who carry a lot don't always show it. So their inner world stays unseen, sometimes even by the people closest to them. And over time, that creates a quiet grief. The grief of not being fully known. The grief of not having words for what's inside. The grief of wondering where anyone would stay if you really saw you. So you manage yourself. You share a little, but not too much. You open up, but only so far. You stay in control because control feels safer than being exposed. This isn't because you're closed off. It's because you learned that showing too much has consequences. That softness was risky. That emotion needed a reason. That vulnerability had to be earned. The upside down of masculinity isn't that men don't feel, it's that many were taught to carry feelings quietly. But feelings don't disappear just because they're unspoken. They settle. They show up as tension in the body, as irritation that doesn't match the moment, as exhaustion that rest doesn't fix. They show up as distance in relationships, as difficulty accepting care, as a sense that something is missing, even when life looks full. And often this gets mistaken for being emotionally unavailable. But there's a difference. Avoidance isn't running away. This is self-protection. The upside down starts to soften when strength is redefined. Not as silence, not as endurance, but as capacity. The ability to feel without falling apart. The ability to speak without losing control. The ability to stay present instead of shutting down. Real strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about being honest and steady at the same time. But that takes practice. Because opening up doesn't mean dumping everything at once. It means pacing yourself. It means learning to name what you feel in simple words. It means letting yourself be seen bit by bit. You don't go from silence to full openness overnight. You build trust with others and with yourself. You learn that speaking doesn't weaken you, that honesty doesn't make you unreliable, that people don't leave just because you stop performing strength perfectly. Another hard truth is this: being needed isn't the same as being known. People can depend on you without really seeing you. They can lean on you without supporting you. Connection requires more risk than reliability. It requires letting someone see you without armor, even briefly. That doesn't make you less strong. It means you're no longer carrying everything alone. And maybe the most important shift of all: you don't need to be falling apart to speak up. You don't need a breakdown to justify how you feel. You're allowed to be human before it becomes unbearable. The upside down exists because emotional depth has always been given space, but you don't have to disappear inside that silence. Strength doesn't shrink when you let yourself be seen. It grows, because now it includes honesty. Now it includes connection. Now it includes the part of you that learned to survive quietly and don't have to anymore. At some point, you realize the problem was never that you were living in more than one reality. The problem was believing you weren't allowed to. One reality is the life people see, the responsibilities, the routines, the roles you fulfill, the version of you that gets things done. Bills are paid, children are raised, work handled, life moving forward. The other reality is quieter and heavier. It's the internal world, memories that still carry charge, emotions that don't always match the moment you're in, reactions that seem to come from somewhere older than today. Most people spend years trying to collapse these into one. They tell themselves they should be over it by now. They judge themselves for functioning while still feeling deeply. They feel shame for carrying pain alongside gratitude, strength, alongside fear. But the upside down isn't a mistake in the system. It is the system. Living in multiple realities is not a dysfunction. It's what happens when a person has lived, loved, lost, adapted, and kept going. The tension comes from trying to deny one reality in favor of the other. You tell yourself to stay present, but the past still visits. You build a stable life, but part of you stays alert. You feel proud of how far you've come, yet still feel the weight of what shaped you. That doesn't mean you're stuck. It means your inner world didn't disappear just because time moved on. This is where integration actually begins. Not by resolving everything, but by allowing multiple truths to coexist without self-punishment. You stop asking which version of me is real. You start understanding that they all are. The grounded adult handled life. The younger part that learned to protect itself. The part of you that loves deeply. The part that stays guarded. None of them are wrong. They're responses to different realities that still run side by side. When people talk about being present, they often misunderstand that what really means presence doesn't require amnesia. You can be present and aware of your history. You can be calm and cautious. You can feel safe and still notice old signals in your body. The nervous system doesn't operate on logic or timelines. It operates on pattern recognition. So when something feels familiar, a tone, a silence, a look, a situation, one reality reacts while another one knows better. That gap between reaction and awareness is the upside down in real time. The work isn't eliminating that gap. The work is learning how to stand inside it without tearing yourself apart. Instead of saying, "Why am I reacting like this?" you say, "Something in me learned this once." Instead of forcing yourself to push through, you pause long enough to respond with choice. That's how living in multiple realities becomes power instead of conflict. Because now you're not ruled by whichever reality is loudest in the moment. You're listening to all of them and choosing how to act. This changes how you love. Love doesn't happen in one reality, it happens across all of them. You bring your hope into connection and your history. You bring your desire for closeness and your awareness of loss. You bring trust and boundaries shaped by experience. That doesn't make love weaker, it makes it conscious. When you stop shaming yourself for having layers, you stop sabotaging connection out of fear that something inside you is too much. You learn to say that part of me exists and it doesn't run my life, but it deserves acknowledgement. That emotional maturity, that's how relationships stop becoming battlegrounds between who you were and who you are now. And this doesn't just apply to love, it applies to how you move through the world. Work, parenthood, friendship, leadership. You show up capable while carrying private weight. You make decisions while holding emotional context others never see. You stay steady not because life is simple, but because you've learned how to balance complexity. That balance is invisible to most people, but it's real. And it costs energy, which is why one of the most damaging lies people internalize is the idea that if I'm functioning, I shouldn't feel like this. High functioning doesn't mean untouched. It means you learned how to survive and keep going. Living in multiple realities requires strength most people never acknowledge, especially when you don't externalize it, dramatize it, or collapse under it. You carry it quietly. And over time, if you stop fighting yourself for it, something stabilizes. You stop trying to merge all of your realities into one neat identity. You stop demanding closure when there is only integration. You stop measuring progress by how little you feel. Instead, you measure it by how well you can hold yourself when different realities collide. Now that's growth, not the absence of the upside down, but your ability to live inside it without losing your footing. And this is where I want to end, not with resolution, not with promise that everything settles, but with honesty. If you're listening to this, it's because you recognize yourself in this space between realities. And I want you to know your presence here matters. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying with conversations that don't reduce life to sound bites. Thank you for supporting this journey quietly, consistently, in your own way. This podcast exists because there are people willing to sit with complexity instead of running from it. And if this episode gave you language for something you've been living with for years, then it's done exactly what it's meant to do. You're not divided, you're layered. And learning how to live in more than one reality at once isn't a flaw, it's a skill. Now, thank you. Love. Thank you.